There are monsters that lurk in shadows, creatures that hide beneath beds and behind closet doors. But the most terrifying monsters are those that wear human faces, those that once walked among us as ordinary men. John Kramer was such a man until the day he became something far worse. Picture, if you will, a cold operating room. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting sickly green shadows across sterile white walls. A man lies on a gurney, his chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate gasps. His name is John Kramer, and he has just been told he has mere months to live. An inoperable brain tumor, they said. A death sentence wrapped in clinical language and apologetic smiles. But this is not where the horror begins. No, the true horror started long before, in a moment of devastating loss that would crack the foundations of a human soul. John Kramer had once been a builder of things, a civil engineer who understood the elegant mathematics of bridges and buildings, who could look at blueprints and see the skeleton of creation itself. He had a wife he adored, a child growing in her womb, and a future that stretched before him like an open highway under summer skies. Then came the accident. The details matter less than the result. His unborn child, ripped away before taking a first breath. His marriage shattered like glass under a hammer. His faith in the fundamental fairness of existence obliterated in the span of a single, horrible moment. John Kramer's world didn't just change, it inverted, turned inside out, became something unrecognizable and obscene. And when the tumor came, when death itself wrapped its skeletal fingers around his throat, something inside him didn't break. It transformed. The baptism in blood there is a particular kind of madness that comes from staring into the abyss of your own mortality. Most of us turn away, seek comfort in denial or faith or the warm embrace of loved ones. But John Kramer didn't turn away. He dove headfirst into that abyss. And what climbed back out was no longer entirely human. His suicide attempted desperate plunge off a cliff in his car should have ended him. The twisted metal, the shattered glass, the blood pooling on cold concrete, all of it screamed death. But he survived. And in that survival, in the exquisite agony of broken bones and ruptured organs, John Kramer experienced something he would later describe as an awakening. Imagine the scene. Emergency lights painting the wreckage in strobing reds and blues. The acrid smell of gasoline mixing with copper blood, and amidst it all, a man pulling himself from the ruins with newfound purpose burning in his eyes. This was his rebirth, his dark baptism. He had touched death and been rejected by it, sent back to the world of the living with a mission that would make angels weep and demons applaud. From that moment forward, John Kramer was dead. In his place stood something that would come to be known by a single, chilling name: Jigsaw. The gospel according to Jigsaw. Every monster has its philosophy, its internal logic that transforms atrocity into purpose. Jigsaw's doctrine is simple, elegant in its horror. Those who don't appreciate life don't deserve life. Listen to those words. Let them echo in the dark chambers of your mind. They sound almost reasonable at first, don't they? Like something a stern teacher might say, a harsh lesson wrapped in tough love. But strip away the pretense, and you'll find something far more sinister: the ravings of a man who has appointed himself as judge, jury, and executioner of humanity itself, in Jigsaw's twisted theology. Suffering is sacrament. Pain is purification. To truly value your existence, you must be willing to shed blood for it, preferably your own. He doesn't see himself as a killer. though his hands are stained crimson with the lives of dozens. No, in his warped perception, he is a teacher, a savior, a prophet of a new and terrible faith. His victims, he calls them subjects, or patients, are selected with the cold precision of his engineering background. A drug addict who has poisoned their own body with narcotics. A liar who has deceived and manipulated others. A person who has taken their own health, their own freedom, their own precious life for granted. Each one, in Jigsaw's estimation, is guilty of the ultimate sin, apathy, and for this sin they must be punished. Not with imprisonment or counseling or any conventional form of justice. No, they must face his games. The Architecture of Agony, let me paint you a picture of what a jigsaw trap looks like. Not the sanitized version you might see in a movie trailer, but the reality of it, the nightmare made flesh and metal. You wake in darkness absolute. The air is thick with the smell of rust and old blood. Your head throbs where you've been drugged, and as consciousness returns, you realize you cannot move. Chains bite into your wrists and ankles. Something cold and metallic encases your skull. Then comes the voice, distorted, mechanical, utterly devoid of mercy. Hello. I want to play a game. A television flickers to life in front of you, illuminating your prison in sickly blue light. On the screen, a puppet grotesque, with spiraling red cheeks and a suit that might have been elegant once, speaks with Jigsaw's voice. It explains your sin, catalogues your failures, lists the ways you have squandered the gift of life. And then it describes what you must do to survive. Perhaps you must reach into a pit of used syringes to find a key. Maybe you must cut into your own flesh to retrieve a combination. Or worse, far worse, you must choose between your own survival and someone else's. Will you pull the lever that saves you but dooms another? Will you saw through bone and sinew to free yourself from shackles? Will you prove your will to live by doing the unthinkable? Every trap is a masterpiece of psychological and physical torture, designed with the meticulous care of someone who once built bridges and now builds monuments to suffering. Gears that turn with clockwork precision, timers that count down with inexorable finality, mechanisms that transform the human body into a canvas for pain, and always, always, there is a choice. Jigsaw never tires of reminding his victims that they have a choice. But it's the choice between a bullet and a noose, between burning alive and drowning, the illusion of free will in a scenario where every option leads to horror. The disciple of despair. You want to understand the true legacy of Jigsaw's philosophy? Look no further than Amanda Young. She was a heroin addict, her veins scarred with needle tracks, her life a slow-motion spiral into oblivion. By all accounts, including her own, she was waiting to die, not actively suicidal, but passively indifferent to whether she woke up the next morning. She was the perfect candidate for Jigsaw's brand of salvation. Her test was one that would become infamous, the reverse bear trap. Picture a medieval torture device, reimagined for the modern Odger contraption of metal jaws locked around her head. Springs wound tight, a timer ticking down. To survive, she had to retrieve a key. But the key wasn't hidden in some drawer or hanging on a wall. It was inside the stomach of a man drugged unconscious, but very much alive, lying on the floor beside her. The choice was simple. Cut open another human being and root through their intestines, or have your skull split apart like an overripe melon dot. She chose survival. She chose to plunge her hands into human viscera, to become baptized in someone else's blood, to cross a threshold that can never be uncrossed. And when that metal trap snapped open and clattered to the floor, Amanda Young believed she had been saved. But had she? In the days and weeks that followed, Amanda found herself drawn back to Jigsaw like a moth to flame. Where others saw a monster, she saw a savior. Where others saw torture devices, she saw instruments of transformation. She became his apprentice, his disciple, his spiritual daughter. She helped design new games, selected new victims, carried forward his dark gospel with the fervor of a true believer. For a time, it seemed to work. Amanda had purpose. She had meaning. She had someone who understood her in a way no therapist or sponsor ever could. Jigsaw had taken a broken woman and given her a reason to exist. But the human mind is not a machine that can be repaired with pain. Trauma doesn't build character, destroys it, eating away at the foundations of sanity like acid through flesh. Amanda's games became crueler, more sadistic. Where Jigsaw at least maintained the pretense of offering survival, Amanda's traps were designed for failure. The keys didn't work. The timers were too short. The choices were illusions, masking inevitable death. She had learned Jigsaw's lessons too well and not well enough. She understood that pain could change people, but she missed the supposed nobility of purpose. Instead, she became what he claimed never to be, a simple killer. Drunk on power, reveling in the screams of her victims. Her end came in a burst of violence and desperation, shot down like the broken thing she had become. And in her death, she proved the fundamental flaw in Jigsaw's philosophy. You cannot heal wounds by inflicting deeper ones. You cannot teach appreciation for life by making existence a living hell. The machine of mortality to truly understand Jigsaw, you must understand his relationship with control. John Kramer was an engineer. An engineer's deal in certainty. They calculate loads and stresses, design systems with redundancies, create order from chaos. An engineer looks at a problem and breaks it down into component parts, into variables that can be measured and manipulated and ultimately solved. But life isn't an engineering problem. Death isn't a bridge that collapsed because someone miscalculated the weight distribution. Human suffering can't be eliminated with better blueprints. Every trap he built was a testament to his need for control. The gears meshed perfectly. The timers ran with atomic precision. Every contingency was accounted for, every possible action anticipated and countered. In a world where cancer could grow unchecked in his brain, where unborn children could be stolen by random accidents, where death itself could come without reason or warning, Jigsaw created little pockets of absolute control. His victims weren't people, not really. They were systems that had malfunctioned, variables that had drifted from their intended values. The drug addict was a biological system that had optimized for the wrong inputs. The liar was a social algorithm running corrupted code. They needed debugging, and Jigsaw's traps were his way of running system, diagnostics. This is the mindset of someone who has lost faith in the organic sciences of existence, who cannot accept that some things simply happen without reason or purpose. Jigsaw needed the universe to make sense, and if it wouldn't cooperate, he would carve out a small piece of it and impose his own terrible order. But human beings resist systematization. We are chaos engines, unpredictable and messy and beautifully, terribly free. And so Jigsaw's perfect machines keep producing imperfect results. People die when they were supposed to live. Survivors emerge more broken than before. The lessons don't take. The enlightenment doesn't come. And with each failure, Jigsaw's grip tightens. More elaborate traps, more severe tests, more blood soaking into concrete floors. The engineer cannot accept that his designs are flawed at a fundamental level that you cannot mechanize morality or automate empathy or build a trap that instills appreciation for life. The viral legacy cancer spreads. It metastasizes, sending malignant cells through the bloodstream to colonize new tissues, transforming healthy organs into tumors. It is grimly appropriate, then, that Jigsaw's legacy spreads the same way. He died. Of course he died. The tumor saw to that, but death was no ending for his philosophy. He had prepared for this contingency with the same meticulous planning he applied to everything else. Tapes recorded in advance. Traps designed to activate posthumously. And most importantly, apprentices trained to carry on his work. Detective Mark Hoffman was one such apprentice, a man who came to Jigsaw not out of a desire for salvation, but out of rage and grief of his own. Hoffman watched Jigsaw work and learned the technical skills, how to build the traps, how to select the victims, how to stage the elaborate games. But he missed the point entirely. Or perhaps he simply didn't care about the point. Hoffman used Jigsaw's methods for personal revenge. He killed people not to teach them lessons about life's value, but because he wanted them dead. The games became sadistic theater, the traps mere window dressing for murder. He was Jigsaw without the pretense of nobility. The philosophy stripped away to reveal the rot underneath. And there were others. Dr. Lawrence Gordon, who lost his foot in one of the original games and emerged so traumatized that he dedicated himself to continuing the work of his torturer. Logan Nelson, who helped build the very first trap and carried guilt like a millstone around his neck. Each one interpreted Jigsaw's teachings through their own damaged psyche, creating new variations on the theme of suffering. This is the true horror of Jigsaw's legacy, not that he created killers, but that he created a tradition of killing. His games became almost ritualistic, with their own iconography and rules and mythology. The puppet became a symbol. The phrase, "I want to play a game," became a harbinger of death. The idea that suffering could be redemptive, that pain could purify, spread like a virus through the minds of the broken and the vengeful. Long after John Kramer's body was cold in the ground, his cancer continued to metastasize through the world. People who had never met him, who knew him only through tapes and newspaper articles, found themselves inspired by his work. The engineer who couldn't control his own fate had found a way to control the world, even in death, to make his mark in blood and screams that would echo long after his own voice fell silent. The psychology of a god, complex. Let us be clear about what John Kramer truly was. A man who believed he had transcended mortality and been granted the right to judge the living. His near-death experience, his survival of what should have been a fatal crash, convinced him that he had been chosen. By what or whom, he likely couldn't say. Jigsaw was never conventionally religious, never spoke of God or destiny in traditional terms. But he believed, with the absolute certainty of the delusional, that his continued existence had meaning and purpose, and that purpose was to separate the worthy from the unworthy, the appreciative from the apathetic, those who deserved life from those who squandered it. This is textbook messianic delusion, a god complex of staggering proportions. Jigsaw looked at humanity and found it wanting, then appointed himself as the instrument of correction. He would save people by destroying them. He would teach the value of life by bringing them to the brink of death. He would cure apathy through the application of existential terror. The psychology here is almost tragically transparent. John Kramer was a man who had lost everything: his child, his wife, his health, his future. He was powerless against the forces that had ruined his life. random chance, biological inevitability, the fundamental unfairness of existence. So he found power where he could, in the torture and manipulation of others, by putting people in his traps. He was no longer the victim. He was in control. He wasn't the one dying of cancer. His victims were the ones facing death. He wasn't the one suffering meaninglessly. He was the one giving meaning to suffering. In his twisted logic, every scream proved his point. Every survival validated his methods. Every death demonstrated the truth of his philosophy. But underneath the elaborate justifications and philosophical pretensions, Jigsaw was simply a man in pain, lashing out at a world that had hurt him. He was projecting his own trauma onto others, forcing them to experience his anguish, his desperation, his terror. If he had to die slowly and agonizingly, then others would too. If he had to fight for every breath, then they would too. If life had become suffering for him, then he would show others what real suffering meant. This is not wisdom. This is not enlightenment. This is the death rattle of a man's humanity, the last gasps of sanity drowning in a sea of grief and rage. The false choice Jigsaw prided himself on offering choice. This was central to his identity, his proof that he wasn't a murderer. "I've never killed anyone," he would say, and in the strictest technical sense, he believed it to be true. He merely created situations. The victims made the choices. But let us examine this choice more closely. Imagine you wake up with a metal collar around your neck, bolted to a wall. In front of you sits a key, just out of reach. Your hand is free, but to grasp the key, you must dislocate your own shoulder, tearing ligaments and grinding bone against bone. A clock ticks down. In 60 seconds, the collar will inject poison directly into your carotid artery. You have a choice: endure unimaginable pain or die. Is this really a choice? Or is it simply torture dressed up as moral philosophy? Jigsaw would argue that the choice is meaningful because you could refuse. You could sit still, accept death, prove that your apathy runs so deep that you won't even fight to survive. But this is sophistry of the cruelest kind. The choice between horrific suffering and death is not a choice, it's a terroristic threat, a gun to the head. The illusion of agency in a situation where all control has been stripped away. And consider the aftermath for those who survive. You've dislocated your shoulder, grabbed the key, unlocked the collar with seconds to spare. You're alive. According to Jigsaw, you've proven your will to live. You've been reborn. You now appreciate life in a way you never did before. But what's the reality? You have post-traumatic stress disorder. You wake up screaming, your shoulder aching where it was torn apart. You can't enter enclosed spaces without panic attacks. You can't trust anyone, can't form healthy relationships, can't function in society. You survived, yes, but at what cost? Is a life of psychological torment really preferable to the death you escaped? Jigsaw's choice is a false dichotomy. It's the choice a hostage-taker offers: do what I say or die. It's the choice an abuser gives: submit or suffer. There is no freedom in it, no genuine agency, no real moral dimension. It's simply cruelty masquerading as philosophy. The abyss stares back, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Jigsaw phenomenon is not the character himself, but our fascination with him. The Saw franchise has spawned 9 films and counting, grossing hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide. People pay money to watch elaborately staged torture. They debate the morality of Jigsaw's methods. Some even express a degree of sympathy for his crusade. What does this say about us? There is something in the human psyche that is drawn to darkness. We rubberneck at car accidents. We read true crime. We watch horror movies and ride roller coasters, seeking controlled encounters with fear and death. Jigsaw taps into this appetite, offering us a safe way to engage with existential questions. What would I do to survive? How far would I go? What lines would I cross? But there's a dangerous edge to this fascination. When we find ourselves sympathizing with Jigsaw, when we nod along with his critiques of modern apathy and wasted potential, we're flirting with a genuinely toxic philosophy. We're accepting, even if just intellectually or hypothetically, that extreme suffering can be justified, that the ends justify the means, that some people deserve torture. This is the slippery slope that leads to atrocity. History is littered with examples of people who convinced themselves that cruelty was necessary, that pain was purifying, that they had the right to inflict suffering on others for their own good. The Inquisition tortured to save souls. Dictators purged to build utopias. Jigsaw is simply a fictional embodiment of this eternal temptation to play God. When we watch Saw films, when we discuss Jigsaw's philosophy, we should be deeply uncomfortable. Not because of the gore, though, the franchise certainly doesn't stint on that, but because we're being asked to entertain monstrous ideas. We're being invited to look into the abyss, and, as Nietzsche warned, the abyss looks back. The final trap in the end. John Kramer's most elaborate trap was the one he built for himself. He convinced himself that his suffering had meaning, that his methods had purpose, that he was a teacher rather than a torturer. He created an entire philosophical framework to justify his actions, to transform his pain into something that could at least be understood, if not accepted. But he was lying to himself. His games didn't rehabilitate people, they traumatized them. His lessons didn't teach appreciation, they taught terror. His legacy wasn't one of enlightenment, but of an endless cycle of violence and suffering. John Kramer died, believing he was a savior. The truth is, he was just another cancer, eating away at the world, leaving nothing but destroyed lives and broken bodies in his wake. His final trap was the belief that there was nobility in his actions, that history would vindicate him, that his victims would one day thank him for the torture he inflicted. This delusion sustained him through the progression of his disease, gave him purpose in his final months, allowed him to die believing he had made a difference. But delusion, no matter how elaborately constructed, is still delusion. Jigsaw was not a philosopher or a teacher or a savior. He was a serial killer with a god complex, a broken man who broke others because he couldn't fix himself. The horror within the true horror of Jigsaw is not the traps, though they are horrific. It's not the body count, though it's substantial. It's not even the philosophy, twisted as it is. The true horror is how easily we can understand him. We've all felt powerless. We've all experienced loss and grief. We've all looked at the world and seen waste and apathy and people squandering opportunities we wish we had. And in our darkest moments, we might have even thought, someone should do something about that. Someone should make them appreciate what they have. Jigsaw is what happens when that dark impulse is allowed to metastasize. He's the cautionary tale about what happens when suffering curdles into rage, when rage hardens into certainty, when certainty gives birth to atrocity. He reminds us that monsters are made, not born, that the line between victim and victimizer is thinner than we'd like to believe, that given the right circumstances, enough pain enough loss, enough existential terror, any of us could become something monstrous. This is the nightmare that Jigsaw represents. Not that there are monsters in the world, but that the monster might be inside us, waiting for the right trigger to emerge. Conclusion: the game never ends. John Kramer is dead. His body rotted away years ago, consumed by the same cancer that consumed his sanity. But Jigsaw lives on. He lives on in the apprentices who continue his work. He lives on in the victims who survived but were never truly free. He lives on in the countless people who have watched his games and felt a sick fascination bloom in their chests. Most disturbingly, he lives on in the philosophy that pain has purpose, that suffering is redemptive, that we have the right to inflict trauma on others if we believe it's for their own good. This is the final horror, that Jigsaw's game never really ends. It echoes through time, through culture, through the dark corners of the human heart where cruelty and righteousness intertwine. "I want to play a game," the voice says. But the truth is, the game is already being played. It's being played in every moment of cruelty justified by supposed good intentions. It's being played in every act of violence dressed up as tough love. It's being played whenever someone looks at another human being and decides they don't deserve empathy, don't deserve mercy, don't deserve life. Jigsaw's traps were made of metal and wire and sharp edges. But the real trap is the one he set for our minds, the seductive idea that suffering can be meaningful, that pain can be pure, that horror can be holy. Don't fall for it. The mind of a killer is a dark place to explore. But it's necessary that we shine a light into that darkness, because only by understanding how monsters are made can we hope to prevent the making of new ones. John Kramer believed he was teaching the value of life. In the end, all he taught us was the depths of human depravity, and the terrible things we can convince ourselves are justified when we're broken enough, desperate enough, certain enough that we're right. That's the real horror. Not the traps, not the games, not even the deaths. The horror is that somewhere, right now, another broken person is convincing themselves that they have the right to play God. Another trap is being built. Another victim is being selected. Another game is about to begin, and the puppet's spiral-painted face grins in the darkness, waiting. Game over.